Okay, guys, I got sent this article, and the title of it really caught my eye, and I quickly realized, holy sh**, I could do an unironic anti-British people segment, and my heart fluttered with joy. The only silver lining to this entire headline. This is from Pink News. Growing number of Brits view trans people negatively. YouGov study finds. A YouGov poll on attitudes towards the LGBTQ+ community has found that hostility towards trans people is growing at an alarming rate in the UK. Within Britain. British land. I always confuse it. If it is the UK, because the UK is the United Kingdom, so it'd be like all of that shit for the most part. So it's just British people, like Britain, England. What's the correct term? I don't care. They're not people, except the ones I like. There are some British people I like, unfortunately. They won't be included in the inevitable annexation of all of Ingerland that we are going to do whenever I become president of the United States. Anyway, the research published on Friday, 11th of August, found that 39% of Brits personally view trans people in a positive light, with 33% saying their feelings are neutral, and 4% saying they don't know. The remaining 25% had negative feelings towards the community. This is up from 16% in 2021, and follows YouGov research in 2022, which found that British people have become less likely to support trans rights. In last year's survey, almost half, 49%, said discrimination against trans people is a significant problem in society. This shift in attitudes comes amid ever-increasing attacks in the community from politicians and the media. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Rishi, I don't know why I read that. I just read the first Rishi, and I just read, like, auto-corrected that. I don't know why. Rishi Sunak, I don't know how it's pronounced, but okay, was heard mocking trans women in footage obtained by Pink News. Wait, Prime Minister? The Prime Minister? No. No. They've got another Rashiki. I don't know where that's from, but it just auto-corrected. You're right the second time? Well, yeah, I know. That's why okay, anyway. Okay, I found the clip. All right. They referenced it, but they didn't actually link a video of it, so I wanted to be able to actually show what he said.
And at the same period of time over the period, you may have noticed Ed Davey has been very busy. Like me, you were probably seeing that he was busy trying to convince everybody that women clearly had penises. And I was reflecting, you all know, I am a big fan of everybody studying maths at 18.
Oh, he said maths. He did the British thing and said maths. Okay, guys, I don't know if you guys can tell, but I've got a lot of racism boiling inside of me right now towards the British people, and I am currently allowing it to fester so that when I let it out in a moment, it's as raw and unfiltered as physically possible.
And I was reflecting, you all know, I am a big fan of everybody studying maths at 18. But it turns out that we need to focus on biology to 18.
Yeah, so very, very, very epic dunk on trans people by the Prime Minister of Britbongerland. So we've been talking about this for a while now, but Britain has a very twisted sense in the media of what is progressive. Here in America, when you look at progressive media, which to be fair is a lot of media, you've got Hollywood is for the most part pretty progressive, you know, a lot of TV shows, a lot of literature, a lot of video games tend to be made by progressive people for a broad audience, but usually the most appreciated by a progressive audience, right? And you will see in modern woke Hollywood, whatever you want to call it, right? Like, in modern progressive-leaning media, you will see overtly pro-trans messaging. Even if it's very lax and very clearly just some form of pandering, you will see very blatant pro-trans messaging. A very clear designation of the fact that if you are progressive, if you are someone on the left who believes in equal rights and goodness and, you know, being respectful and not viewing others as bad because they're different, then you would accept trans people. and you would see them as valid. Spider-Verse is a good example. I assume Spider-Verse was made like in America, but it could be a Canadian movie or something. I don't know where it was made, but that's generally the case you'll see in America in particular, right? That a very clear designation of trans people as a group that is actively being advocated for by progressives in the LGBT community and like the broader left as a whole and activists as a whole. And that's just the simple matter of fact of it, right? Like a very clear realization of the fact that trans people are pretty much just the next group of people that have been for a very long time discriminated against and disenfranchised, that it's now time for our society to realize, deserves some recognition and respect, right? That said, in the UK, there's a very different dynamic that exists in regards to trans people. It feels as though right now, particularly in the UK, particularly in British land, especially among politicians and so-called activists, like progressive activists, there is a parasitic leech of transphobia that has infected so-called progressive spaces in the UK. Obviously, TERFs are the best example of this. England is a place where, broadly speaking, there is a lot of conservative, dumb, chuddy types, right? Like, there are plenty of hogs in the UK. But if you compare the average political leanings of the UK to America, tends to be a little bit more left-leaning, right? So much so that most left-wing people in America acknowledge that the Overton window in most of Europe, and including Britain, is significantly further left than it is here in America. I wouldn't say significantly, but noticeably further left. Which is, and the fact that there isn't necessarily like a overt, super far-right, open fascist party with significant power in the UK in the same way as like Ron DeSantis and Trump. Like UKIP and the Brexit party and so on are pretty awful, but one, they never had anywhere near as much power as Trump or DeSantis or any of these other people, and they were never anywhere near as popular, right? And they're not even as bad, at least not openly as bad, with their politics. So it's like, for the most part, it feels as though the UK, or I keep saying the UK, it's because I don't consider this part of the world a place, okay? For the most part, Britain is very much, it feels as though, to your average American, a little ahead of us in regards to progressive activism. But at the same time, it feels as though bigots in the UK, recognizing that there is a very strong adherence in the general media and political discourse to civility politics, have realized that the best way to teach and popularize bigotry is by disguising it as progressivism. It really does feel as though a large part of the popularity of the transphobia growing in the UK right now is due in part to a long trend of issues I've noticed with progressive UK politics. For example, and this might still be the case, but I know as of like 2019, last time I checked, in Britain, legally, a woman, a cis woman I should say, cannot rape anyone, technically, but particularly cannot legally rape a cis man. It's not like a thing that is legally a thing that exists, because they defined rape as when forcible penetration takes place with a penis, which is what they clarified in those laws. And so because a woman raping, like a cis woman raping someone, can't do penal penetration, there couldn't be charged with actual, like, legit rape, regardless of how obviously rape it is. Wait, isn't that U.S. law as well? It was, and we changed that years and years and years ago. It is still the case in some states and, like, jurisdictions and whatnot. Like, there are different, like, more local laws, but for the most part, yeah, what if she uses a strap-on? Penis. It has to be a penis. That was how the law wrote it. So, like, even a woman... They wrote it in such a way so that even if a woman sexually assaulted a man with an object, it wouldn't count as rape. MRAs, men rights activists, and red pill types, going back to like 2013, used this as one of their biggest arguments against feminism. Because a lot of feminists that we now know as TERF activists in the UK defended these laws tooth and nail. Laws like that, the logic behind laws like that, where you're literally like defining laws around who defended this? TERFs defended this. Have you not seen the types of people on Twitter who like fantasize about men getting raped in prisons? Have you not seen these women? They're mostly women. They're mostly British women. Have you not seen them? Not familiar with TERFs? No, what the fuck? You are living a good life then, misogynist. Just trust me that I am not making shit up here. They exist, and if you spend enough time looking at TERF Twitter, you'll find them. By enough time, I mean, like, look at any hashtag that has to do with trans people trending on Twitter. It really is, it's really bad. It's really, really bad. I think the UK's general politics are like this bizarre instance of the right recognizing they can't be openly mask off anymore at all in a lot of cases, and are now appropriating progressivism as a way of pushing bigotry in a very bizarre way. It's where you guys know that like modern like the current era of American anti-trans messaging came from TERFs, right? The argument that like trans women are predators that are going to like take women's rights away, are going to make it harder for women to succeed, are going to be predators toward them in bathrooms and locker rooms, etc. These are all concepts that started with TERFs, primarily in the UK, because that's where like the TERF hive is. I need you guys to understand. There is a reason why I give the British so much. The research published on Friday, we're just going to read the beginning of the article again because, you know, we literally only got 2 paragraphs in before I stun-locked on talking about it. The research published on Friday, the 11th of August, found that 39% of Brits personally view trans people in a positive light, so that's the majority, with 33% saying their feelings are neutral. So, like, the majority of Brits don't hate trans people, to be clear, by the way. Like, don't doomer about this or anything. There is a rising problem, for sure. I think this is probably more so an activation in the more latently existing ignorance and bigotry that existed towards trans people already. Like, let's be real. I feel like it's easier for someone to be inherently bigoted towards trans people in some way than to be, like, inherently, through their upbringing, bigoted towards, like, people of other races. Because there's a good chance that the concept of another race, like just people of a different skin color and coming from a different place than you, is probably a lot easier to understand for most people and accept for most people than the idea of something as fundamental and to them as set in stone as gender being, you know, something that it's not, or that they assumed it was, right? In last year's survey, almost half, 49%, said discrimination against trans people is a significant problem in society. This shift in attitudes comes amid ever-increasing attacks on the community from politicians and the media. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was heard mocking trans women in footage obtained by Pink News. That's what we just watched a minute ago. It followed his government. I don't know why, but it feels so weird for them to describe it as his government. But I mean, yeah, okay. I don't know. I'm just not used to reading about European politics, okay? It followed his government taking a hardline stance against trans rights, blocking Scotland's democratically passed Gender Recognition Act reforms, and signaling plans to amend the Equality Act to remove protections for trans people. Meanwhile, the opposite has shifted its own stance on trans rights, or the opposition has shifted its own stance on trans rights, with Labour and the Conservatives now singing largely from the same hymn sheet and using trans rights as a wedge issue, quote-unquote. The media has lapped this up gladly. Newspapers including the Daily Telegraph, The Times, and The Guardian are notorious for platforming gender-critical and anti-trans rhetoric, while earlier this year, Channel 4 faced criticism for a documentary, Gender Wars, which critics said added fuel to the fire. Yeah, for the record, a lot of these mainstream news outlets, especially in the UK, have seen this, like, culture war over trans people, not as, like, oh, we're mainstream news outlets. We have some level of responsibility to report the actual truth. You know? Like, the actual, like, danger of this propaganda boiling up about trans people. Instead, they see it as an opportunity to monetize it, to basically farm the, like, the old school mainstream media equivalent of clicks off of this culture war issue. Which in reality isn't a culture war issue, it's people dredging up a debate about whether or not people should be allowed to live their lives. YouGov surveyed a group of 1,023 LGBTQ plus Britons and 2,313 cis-straight adults between 30 May 17, June, and 2 to 3 August, or the 2nd and 3rd to August, sorry, my bad, I was confused. Between the 30th of May to the 17th of June and the 2nd to 3rd of August 2023. When participants were asked what they thought the general public's attitude towards trans people were, 51% flagged them as negative, up from 44% in 2021, while 2/3 of Britons with a negative view of trans people said they thought the public feels the same way, 66%. Only 8% of cisgender, gay, lesbian, and bisexual Britons admitted to holding negative views of trans people, compared to 75% who have a positive view and 17% who have a neutral view. Cisgender, lesbians, and bisexual women were found to have the most positive feelings towards trans people, with 84 to 85% and 66 to 68% feeling very positive. In July 2023, a survey of 969 LGBTQ+ Brits published by YouGov found that just 3% use the trans exclusionary acronym LGB when referring to the community. So to be very, very clear, the actual group of people where the rhetoric is coming from is very small. Not to mention the arguments they're making about how, like, the TERF movement is this, like, rising up of women and feminists who are against having their rights taken away by trans women being recognized as human beings who deserve respect, or whatever. And like, that they, claiming that they feel as though, and a lot of them claim to be lesbians, and they say that, like, they're protecting their community against these men who are trying to infiltrate. But then at the same time, it keeps turning out the majority of the people who run these, like, LGB Alliance, LGB Front, LGB Without the T organizations are always straight people. They're always straight white people claiming to be gay, but it ends up, like, they end up getting doxxed. The people behind the organizations get doxxed, and it turns out to be a psyop. The LGB Without the T and LGB Alliance people, they're straight. They literally on their like websites claim to be run by gay people for gay people against trans people, and it's run by straight people who got doxxed and their actual identities found out. I'm just so glad we had an excuse to genuinely do an unironic Britain hate segment. I really, really do hope we annex the entirety of the British Isles one day and turn it into a state. I really do. I hope we annex Britain. To war with them.